Well, I am grateful to be here with you this morning. Just to tell you a little bit about me, I was the director of the Refuge Ministry of Healing at Imago Dei. I have a degree both in divinity and in psychology, and I've been bringing that experience together to talk to local churches about embodied spirituality. What does that mean? Embodied meaning relating to the physical body. How can we better follow the Spirit of Christ by paying attention to the body? And I have to confess to you that this does not come naturally to me at all. I am a person that spends a lot of time just kind of lost in my own thoughts. Luckily, it's healed a little bit, but for the past 2 weeks, I kid you not, I had a whole black eye. And I would like to tell you some heroic story that I intervened in a domestic violence dispute, or I was rock climbing and fell off a cliff. But no, what actually happened is I opened a car door directly into my face, which I don't recommend. I was like, I can't believe I did that. What just happened? I was in my head and not paying attention to what my body was doing, clearly. And I think as Christians sometimes this can happen, that our faith exists in our heads. Like we know the stories, we can recite the doctrine, but we end up doing things that cause harm to ourselves and to others. Now, I can clearly see that you are a community that seeks to love your neighbors, and I commend you for that. I applaud you for that. Thank you for your witness to the world. Sometimes I do a whole series on this and talk about how in the Bible, early Christians are called followers of Jesus. Following meaning to align the movement of our body in the direction of love. And there's some disagreement in the church about what it means to love. I was down at the convention center downtown recently. There was a Comic-Con, about this, where people dress up as superheroes and other different characters. And there was a man on the sidewalk outside. There were a lot of people around, and he had a bullhorn. And he was yelling at people, just right in front of him, yelling about the love of God. And I thought, I don't know that these people are feeling loved right now. I didn't feel loved hearing it, but we're reading the same scriptures. So why are we interpreting love differently? Now, that's an extreme example. But sometimes it's not clear how to love people well. And anyone who has actually tried to love your neighbors knows that pretty quickly we run into problems. It gets complicated. So I know you're in a series on spiritual practices. What are the practices that can help us to love others better? And I want to suggest to you the practice of attending to your own body and to the body of others, that this can be a helpful tool to align ourselves with the love of Christ. Now, the scripture reading that we had is from Romans. Here, the Apostle Paul is also struggling to love others. He says, I don't do what I want, but instead I do what I hate. And he says that it is because of sin that is in the flesh. Now, sin brings up different interpretations as well, so I want to define this for us this morning. Sin meaning to harm the self, to harm another, or to harm our relationship with God, who is love. And there is sometimes a tendency to point to the sins of others. It's easier to do that, but the Bible tells us do not judge. So we're going to focus this morning on ourselves. All of us have at some time or another acted in ways that do not align with our beliefs, and have caused harm. And that may be unintentional, like my black eye. And Paul doesn't understand why he's doing this. We now have more information about the brain that can help us make sense of this experience that all of us have had. We basically have two different modes of operating in our brain. One is when we're feeling safe. In other words, when we're feeling cared for by a good and loving God. We could call that posture faith. Another, God designed in our bodies to help us to survive. And that is when we feel afraid, when we sense some threat, our brain has this mode of red alert, and that it causes this immediate reaction in our body so that we can protect ourselves from this threat. And we can go to the first slide here. I'm sorry that it might be difficult to read, but I'll explain it. So you might have heard of fight or flight. What happens when we go into this survival mode is that blood actually leaves our brain and goes into our arms and our legs, so that if, say, for instance, a tiger jumps out at us, we just respond instinctively to eliminate that threat, or if we can't fight off the tiger, we can run away and avoid the danger. And if we can't fight or flee, if we're stuck in that situation of danger, we can freeze. So in animals, this looks like playing dead or going limp, kind of a numb, passive posture that can protect us from further harm and kind of conserve our energy. Psychologists have also identified another one, which they call fawning. This is if we're trapped in a situation, if freeze won't work, say we're trapped in a cage with the tiger, then we might want to make friends with the tiger, give it treats so it doesn't try to eat us. This is a reaction that I have noticed myself. Sometimes it can be common for women in the church, that we have been taught to support and appease men in power, even if it's harmful to ourselves. The environment that we're in can affect which of these reactions we have. Some reactions we're taught are more acceptable for some groups of people. But the switch that gets flipped in our brain to go into this red alert, that happens immediately, it happens instinctually. We don't have control over it in the moment. And when our brain is on red alert, we only have access to this older part of the brain. Some people call it the survival brain. So we can't really think clearly. We actually don't have access to our rational mind or language. We can't take in new information. We can't access the part of the brain that exercises empathy, so we can't have compassion for others. These are pretty good survival strategies for surviving a tiger. And in the course of human history, these types of life-threatening experiences were pretty rare. But in the modern world, we face different types of threats. Now we're constantly being bombarded with things to be afraid of. If you watch the news or any other kind of media, we hear about terrorism, we hear about crime, natural disasters. Now we have climate change and inflation and chemicals in the food and our water, on and on. It just keeps adding on. And we don't get any sense of resolution to these threats. There are also threats not just to our physical safety, but to our dignity. If we are in relationships where we're treated with contempt, if we are in a social system that dehumanizes us or discriminates against us because of our race, because of our gender, because of our sexuality, or our abilities, our body reacts just like it does for a tiger. This is why Resmaa Menakem says that white body supremacy is not just an idea, it is a felt sense of safety. And when we don't feel safe, our body reacts out of that fear. By fighting, getting defensive, arguing. Some people at the convention center were yelling back. It was just an argument that was happening. Or we react by running away and avoiding the situation. Or just giving up, kind of going along with whatever other people want. These are normal, healthy reactions to fear. But fear makes it difficult to love our neighbors, to love our enemies, and even to love ourselves. I think this is why the Bible says over and over and over and over again, do not fear. Fear is the opposite of love. But this reaction happens so fast that just saying do not fear isn't enough. Remember, our survival brain does not understand language. This is why Resmaa Menakem says we need to work on the level of the body so that we don't get hijacked into doing or saying things that we regret. And instead, to align our intentions with our actions, to do what we want to do. Working on the level of the body means first paying attention to the signals of our body. Notice when we are in red alert. Am I operating now out of love or out of fear? And if I'm operating out of fear, to practice taking a step back, taking a break, engaging in some embodied practices that can bring us back into the spirit of love. Our next slide. This is a framework that psychologists use that I have found helpful. So on one side, we have fight or flight. That's like when we have too much energy. There's just too much going on. We feel overwhelmed. And when we're in fight or flight, our heart starts beating faster. Our breathing becomes more shallow. We might start sweating. We're getting ready to fight or run for our lives. And then on the other side is freeze and fawn. This is when we don't have enough energy and we feel just numb and tired and disengaged. But then in the middle, this is where we feel calm, open, we can think clearly, we can allow ourselves to feel our emotions, we can connect with others, we can engage with new information and experiences, and we can receive feedback. Sometimes we don't know that our intention to love actually did harm unless we listen. But we can't listen if our brain is in survival mode. So it's in this middle section that we can take risks, knowing that we are loved by a good God, and then we can grow in loving others. Now, as you start noticing this, as I did in my own journey, I noticed I was outside of this window of tolerance often. When I gave myself a black eye, I was not running from a lion. I have developed a habit of dissociating from my body because of trauma. If you have experienced trauma, you might notice a strong resistance to attending to the body. That's normal. Your brain is trying to keep you safe because the body has not been a safe place. So be gentle with yourself. And in my journey, embodied practices that I'm going to talk about in a minute have been a pathway to healing. And I've been able to spend more time in the state of the window of tolerance, being calm and open, this posture of faith. Next slide. This, I think, is the, next one after that. I think is the scriptural answer to Paul in Romans, that if we walk by the Spirit, we will not gratify the desires of the flesh. I think these embodied practices allow us to walk in the Spirit. So what are these practices? One is breath prayer, which we did at the beginning of the service. Taking deep breaths to the bottom of their belly actually works in both of those directions. So if you have too much energy, taking deep breaths will help calm you down. But also, taking deep breaths can help energize you if you're feeling disengaged. It brings more oxygen into the brain. But even just paying attention to the breath can have a similar effect. So I know Giuseppe did a whole service on breath prayer. It's a very powerful practice. It's something that we can do in the moment, maybe even when we're in the middle of a conversation and noticing that we're starting to get a little bit activated, a little bit amped up. Other people don't even need to know that we're doing this, just noticing the breath. But we can also take a pause, take a break. Again, if we're in the middle of a conversation, we can say, this conversation is really important to me. I would like to reflect more. Can we come back to it? And then go and ask your body what it needs in that moment to come back into a state of calm. It might be as simple as food or water or sleep. If these basic needs aren't met, it's very difficult to care for others. But in the busyness of daily life, most of us neglect them sometimes. I didn't get enough sleep last night. I'm going to be honest about that. And this can cause us to act in ways that are not aligned with love. So caring for ourselves is a way that we can help care for others. Exercise also helps in both directions. Just taking a walk can burn off excess energy. It can move stress hormones out of the body, but also can help us to feel more alive if we're kind of on the checked out side of the spectrum. Solitude is a good practice for me, spending some time alone just to allow myself to sit with my feelings, maybe doing something creative, or also being with people that we love, playing with children, talking to someone that we trust. An embodied practice really can be anything that helps us to feel safe and at home in the body. It can work in the moment to bring ourselves back when we notice that we're in survival brain. But it also can help us develop habits so that in this time of fear, where fear is rampant in our society, we can stay grounded in the spirit of love.